William Bastone, editor of The Smoking Gun. He co-authored the piece exposing the identity of Witness 40. Tell us more about her, and how did you find out who she was?
Well, what we did is we looked at the 2 volumes of her grand jury testimony, which is heavily redacted, but we zeroed in on the portions that gave a little bit of biographical detail about her. Excuse me. And we used that information, you know, everything from the fact that she was adopted, divorced, had a couple of felony convictions, and some other stuff. And then we basically went online and looked at some a Facebook page that we believe she was associated with, and I'll spare you all the details, but by a process of elimination, we zeroed in on her, figured out, got her name, and then we went and checked on Sandra McElroy's background, and it basically dovetailed exactly with Witness 40. Everything.
In her testimony, she had admitted that she'd been convicted of
check fraud. 2 felony counts of check fraud in 2007, had received 3 years of probation, suspended sentence. And so, you know, we reached out to a couple of other people who had had interactions with her, and it made us convinced that it was the same woman.
So how was she presented to the grand jury? What did the police know? What did the district attorney know? And explain exactly what she said.
Well, she initially, she was not found by law enforcement. She approached law enforcement more than a month after the incident. She approached the St. Louis County Police, gave an account of what occurred. 5 weeks later, she met with the FBI and 2 Justice Department prosecutors, and then the day after that, they put her in the grand jury for the first time. So she comes up with this story that she sat on for a month and tells the cops this story. And then 5 weeks pass before she basically goes into the grand jury. And the thing that is incredibly puzzling is that I don't think that anyone attempted to determine whether what she told them was true or not. Because as we point out, I don't know if we point out in the story, but our interest in investigating her began and found out who she was and everything about her. It took us 2 days to do that. We don't have subpoena power. We can't get her phone records. It took us 2 reporters 3 days to find her. And the cops had 5 weeks to find out. First, the story on its face was wholly unbelievable. And there were just simple investigative tasks that the cops could have done that could have disproven her. So what they did, who knows what they did, but what the effect is, as I think we point out in our story, is that they basically allowed her story now to get baked into the narrative of the grand jury.
Well, interestingly, her claim, her initial claim, because she changed the story, right? Her initial claim was because she was a white woman in a largely black neighborhood, that when she was asked why she was there, was that she was trying to find a former high school friend that she hadn't seen in over 20 years and got lost, couldn't find the address, and got out of her car to ask for instructions. So,
and then amazingly, this cataclysmic event happens right in front of her.
So you would think the police would at least say, well, let's see if the surveillance footage is, or the video footage of her car is anywhere in the vicinity.
They actually eventually did that when she was questioned by the FBI and the 2 Justice Department prosecutors. They basically said to her, you know, that there are surveillance cameras in the area and no one picked your car up. How could that be? And she had no explanation. And they asked her, well, how'd you get there? And she described her path of getting there. And then they said, well, after it occurred, how did you leave? And she gave an explanation that was impossible based on the way the roads were. It was very clear that she looked at a map of the area, and looking at a map, or if you go online, MapQuest or Google Maps, it appears as if there is a pathway out of the area, and that's the way she took. But that thing's been closed for like 2 or 3 years, and if you had physically been there, you would have known there was only one way out. So the story fell apart, and they kind of picked the story apart. But you know what you don't really know is there are 12 grand jurors in there, and you don't really know if anyone bought part of her story or that figured into their final decision, which is really kind of the scary part of it. It's like a person comes up with an insane story, approaches the cops with it, and usually the way it works is like, okay, thank you for coming in, we'll be in contact with you, and then they're never heard from again.
So your article notes that Sandra McElroy appeared at the Ferguson grand jury November 3rd with a spiral notebook purportedly containing her handwritten journal entries from August. The opening entry in her journal on the day Brown died declared, quote, "Well, I'm going to take my random drive to Florissant. Need to understand the black race better, so I stop calling blacks niggers and start calling them people." That was her quote. I never use that word, except this is so significant right now because she used that word. What did Bob McCullough understand about who she was?
Well, it was at the end. It was at the waning moments of her first appearance in the grand jury on October 23rd. I mean, she was virtually out the door when she says, but as a matter of fact, "Oh, you know, I wrote all this stuff down in my journal after it happened." And they were, "Would you like to see it?" And they were like, "Sure," you know. And that meant she was coming back. So 10 days passes, and she appears with this one volume that is it's a notebook, her August notebook. And everything that precedes August 9th are like one-line entries. You know, I wrote in the piece, you know, they probably should have checked to see if the ink was wet on the notebook, because there's no doubt what she did is it was created after the fact to buttress this harebrained story that she told. And, you know, it just seems like if you know, we point out in the story, like we went back and looked. You know, we knew what her Facebook handles were, and we knew what her YouTube account was and her Twitter account was. And she, you know, after the shooting, even after her grand jury testimony, she was saying these incendiary things online, and it
Well, that's the. Could you talk about that? What you found from her social media accounts in terms of her biases, and also her support of Darren Wilson and police officers in general.
And if you talk to her.
Yeah, I'll tell. Yeah, I'll explain that as well. Yeah, we looked. You know, she is a very active commenter on Mike Brown. And she has a couple of Facebook accounts that we've linked to her, and she's acknowledged after the fact of hers. And she was constantly commenting about the case, supportive of Officer Wilson. And she would do things like, most of what she would do is she would be in the comment sections on television stations or print publications. You know, there's a story and then there's a comments underneath, and she'd hop in there. And she'd do things like, one afternoon commenting on some news story about Ferguson, she just posts a graphic that floats around in these kind of right-wing circles, and it's a photograph of Michael Brown lying dead in the street, and it's captioned something along the lines of "Stop asking for justice for Michael Brown. He got his justice." You know, and it's a photo of him dead in the street. And she's constantly was doing stuff like that, and you know, pray for Officer Wilson. And you know, when she was in the grand jury, she basically denied that she was like a stooge for Officer Wilson. She was just there to tell the truth. You know, and she was involved in a Facebook page that she started 10 days after the shooting that purportedly was there to support law enforcement officers and first responders in Ferguson, and had nothing to do with Officer Wilson. And they were raising money in a kind of a crowdsourced fashion. And in the end, they donated all the money to the Officer Wilson Trust Fund. So, you know, I mean, this was all easily obtainable.
Can she be charged with perjury?
She should be charged with perjury. She lied to the cops. That's making false statements. The first time, September 11th, when she sat down and she spoke with the FBI and the Department of Justice, she lied to them. The first time they put her in the state grand jury, she lied. The second time, she admitted she lied the first time and then lied again. So she's got, yeah, she should. You know, and it's one of these things where, yes, she has said that she she's been diagnosed as being bipolar, and that she has bouts of mania. But, you know, she insinuated herself into a case of national importance and spun out a story that was totally untrue. And do you walk away from that without some sort of you know, the government just saying, oh, that's fine. Next time something like this happens, if you're a lunatic and you want to come forward and create a story that's going to back up the cops, come on in. We're happy to have you.
But that's the bigger question in my mind. It's not what she did, but what prosecutors did. Because either they were totally inept in one of, as you say, one of the biggest cases in recent times of national attention, or they knew or suspected that she was lying and didn't care, which was even worse.
If you're a prosecutor and you know that someone's going to come into a grand jury and lie, you can't really allow them to do that. That's called creating a perjury trap.
Can a new grand jury be convened based on this?
I don't know. I mean, I think that's probably a fairly tough thing to do.
And you spoke to her?
Yes. I mean, she would not talk to us before the story came out. We published the story on Monday morning. Yesterday, I corresponded with her in which she admitted that, yes, in fact, she was witness 40, and she expressed concerns for the safety of her 3 minor children, and she's trying to erase her social media presence. And then I had she wanted to have a conversation off the record, which we had a lengthy conversation off the record, and hopefully we'll maybe try to see if she'll want to move some of that on the record.